So this is a hard story again. Why do you think it's such a staple in Sunday school rooms? Like being brought up, this is like a story of faith.
What you're pointing out is one of the real problems with the ways that we introduce kids to faith is we try to find the exciting superhero moments and we don't think about the very real implications of some of these stories, like Noah and all the death that comes along with that, Samson and what a terrible dude he is. So I think this is a real caution to all of us, not just as parents and not just as people who write curriculum for kids, that sometimes there's this tendency to grasp at what's really we think exciting about faith and about the Bible, and sometimes slowing down a little bit and questioning the stories a little bit, like Bobby's done tonight, can maybe save us from diving feet first into a story that maybe isn't all that helpful, at least at that stage anyway. So that's my guess anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a strange and really cool grace to this clumsiness, the way we're quite clumsy with the scriptures, the way we maybe haven't always known how to take great care or to take a look at these stories from more complicated angles. Like many of you grew up with these stories and they have become more complicated for you, and you're still here and you're still questioning them and they're still becoming something new to you. So I also think that we should re-examine what we do with these stories, particularly like putting them like they're cartoons on the covers of books for kids. But I also think kids, there's this really beautiful developmental wisdom in kids, and they sort of take things from the stories that they can and leave what they kind of can't cope with. And as they grow up, there's just this grace that they can wrestle with the stories maybe more appropriately. But I love what you had to say about that, Jim.
Yeah, I think age appropriate is the real question. When do we introduce stories at appropriate ages for our kids? I think we're all doing that, as parents. And then sometimes for us too, there's stories that just don't work for me in this stage of my life, and I have to set them aside and come back to them later. That's all good exercise too.
My question is also this. Delilah. I know Samson fell in love with her, and I wonder if Delilah felt the same.
I think Bobby did a great job sort of riffing on this story and speculating about. This is one of the really interesting things, particularly in the Hebrew scriptures. Bobby even mentioned this near the start about judges, but this happens generally in the Hebrew scriptures. We are told what people do, and we're not told a lot about why they do it. So you find this in Genesis a lot. Abraham will do things, and you get very little internal monologue of what the characters are thinking and what's motivating them. And I think what that does is it lets us ask questions like Bobby was doing tonight, like you're doing right now, and to wonder about why the characters are thinking away, why are they doing things, and hopefully then we can do some self-reflecting on ourselves and realize, hey, we do a lot of things without thinking about them either. And maybe a little bit of slowing down and wondering about, why am I motivated this way? Why is this emotion so big for me? And if I thought about this, I slowed down about this, maybe I would make different choices in my life. All that to say, we really don't know, although there's a great Regina Spektor song about Delilah and Samson. Maybe check that one out.
Jason, I kind of laughed because I like your question a lot. Like what? We should wonder that. It's a great question. There's this tradition and how Jewish people like to handle these texts. And they love to say, what if? What if it was this way? What if it was this way? And I like your question. It's asking, are they on equal footing? Probably not. It's a really wonderful thing to wonder about all the characters in the story. So I like it.
What I'm wondering is, how do you go with kids? How do you introduce the fact that the story is more subtle than it seems? I recall having this problem with my university discipline. I learned after I went to grad school, almost everything I was taught in first year was wrong. So is there a way to put this across to kids where we're not focusing on something wrong, to get it across to them that there is subtlety here? I don't quite see how we introduce that as they grow up.
Well, I think it's always tough. In every story, you have to approach it in different ways, and you have to think about your audience for it. So here, we write our own kids' curriculum at Commons specifically for that reason, because we looked at how some of these stories we're being taught to kids, and we're like, well, that's not really what's going on there. We're sugarcoating it a little bit, and maybe there's other ways that we can do it. So we took that upon ourselves. That said, if I was doing Samson with my 4-year-old daughter, I'd probably set it aside and say, this is an inappropriate story right now. With my 10-year-old son, I could probably talk to him about, look what happens when somebody does something bad to us, and then we escalate with more revenge there, and things get worse and worse and worse. And Bobby said you go from 30 to 300 to 3,000. I could have a meaningful conversation with my 10-year-old about how revenge escalates, and how Samson is not somebody that we want to emulate in our lives. But again, it's, where's the age of that child? Where's their development at? What's an appropriate conversation on any particular day? There's certain days where it's just not fruitful to sit down with my son and have a conversation about the escalation of revenge. But there are times when you can do that, right? Because he and his sister get in these fights back and forth. So I think a little bit of sensitivity and a little bit of empathy in terms of where are they in their journey. And then, a Christian answer, I'd say there is some element of being guided by Spirit. And where is Spirit speaking to us about how we have conversations and how we enter them into? I think it's a tough one. As a parent, I am still trying to figure this out. And as a community, Bobby helps lead and give guidance to our team that writes curriculum for kids. And we're wrestling with these questions all the time. So it's a tough one, but I think that's why we're doing a series like this, is so we can wrestle with them. And then maybe you can figure out, okay, well, what do we take down a level, to my kids, and when and how, and all those kinds of questions.
Tom, I think there's, you got your thumbs up, which means you're totally satisfied, but I'm still going to jump in here. I think there's an interesting theme in your question, if I'm hearing you right, around control and beautifully protection. How do we protect our kids? And I would say we can't always. And in particular, I was thinking about the kind of movies I loved as a kid. I was allowed to watch whatever I wanted. My mom would probably say different now, but, and one of my favorite movies was the movie Labyrinth, a Jim Henson movie. It's kind of creepy and scary, and I loved it. I loved the scary parts. I loved the kind of wicked parts. I loved all of the themes, and it was maybe a bit mature for me, but it still spoke to me somehow as a kid. And I think I'm really glad that on some level nobody took a complicated film away from me as a kid. It wasn't an inappropriate film for a kid. So I think there is certainly a point of discretion and care and responsibility when we have a complicated text. But as a child, struggling with some things, I actually really loved having this artifact that was a little bit more mature and more complicated than I was probably ready for. So I think kids are really resilient and beautifully wise, but also we should be responsible and careful.
And I think there's something about parents having that option, but also as a church, I think it is appropriate that we hold those things back and we don't take kids into stories that everybody in the room might not be ready to do. So as a parent, I probably talk to my kids about stories in the Bible that we wouldn't necessarily at a curriculum level with everybody's kids in community who are all at different ages and stages. And that's that kind of sensitivity we're talking about.